On the morning of the 26th of December, 2004, the sea along the coast of southern India did something strange. It drew back. It retreated hundreds of meters from the shore, bearing a stretch of wet seabed that no living person had ever seen. And out of that seabed rose long, straight rows of dark stone, like the walls of a drowned city surfacing from the deep. Fishermen and tourists stood on the sand and stared. Then the water came roaring back as the great tsunami, and swallowed it all again. But when the waves finally drew off, the beach had been scoured clean, and the sand gave up a carved granite lion, a half-finished elephant, and shrines that had lain buried for more than 1,000 years. For 3 centuries, a local legend had spoken of 7 temples that once stood on this shore, 6 of them taken by the sea, and only 1 left standing. This was the town of Mahabalipuram, on the Coromandel coast of India. And for a moment, that terrible morning, the ocean seemed to answer a riddle 300 years old. Had there really been a great stone city here that the waves had drowned? This is the story of Mahabalipuram, the harbour of a vanished dynasty, a city of gods cut from the living rock, and the legend of the 7 pagodas beneath the sea. To understand the stones in the surf, you have to go back about 1400 years, to one of the great forgotten dynasties of southern India. They were called the Pallavas. From their capital at Kanchipuram, they ruled much of the Tamil country, a kingdom of temples and scholars and poets. For centuries, the powers of southern India had looked inland, fighting one another over rivers and rice fields. But the Pallavas did something different. They turned to face the sea. Their land lay on the Coromandel coast, the long eastern shore of India that looks out across the Bay of Bengal. And on that shore they built a port, where the monsoon winds could carry ships east, towards Southeast Asia and China. Around the year 630, the Pallava throne passed to a king whose name still clings to this place. He was Narasimhavarman I, and his people gave him a title, Mamalla, the great wrestler. He was a warrior who broke the rival Chalukya kingdom and stormed their capital, and a patron of the arts whose reign became a golden age. The port that grew beside his court took his name, Mahabalipuram, the city of Mamalla, the place we now call Mahabalipuram. Ships from this harbour traded with Sri Lanka, with the kingdoms of Southeast Asia, and far beyond. Roman, Persian, and Chinese coins have been found in its soil, the small change of a port that touched half the world. And here, where the kings could watch the sea, they began a work that would outlast their empire. They began to carve. Not to build, stone upon stone, but to cut temples and gods directly out of the granite hills that rose from the sand. Mahabalipuram is, above all else, a place of stone. The Pallava sculptors worked the way almost no one had before them, treating whole boulders and rock faces as if they were soft clay. From a single long outcrop of granite, they carved a row of temples called the Panchacha, the 5 chariots. Each one is hewn from the living rock, a complete shrine named for the heroes of the great epic, the 5 Pandava brothers and their shared queen, Draupadi. No bricks, no joints, no foundations. Each temple is a single piece of the earth, sculpted from the top down. Into the hillsides they cut cave temples, halls with carved pillars and walls of gods, leading back into the rock. In one of them, the goddess Durga rides into battle against a buffalo-headed demon, her many arms full of weapons, frozen mid-charge in the stone. And on 2 enormous boulders, side by side, the Pallavas carved one of the largest reliefs on earth. It is called the Descent of the Ganges, or Arjuna's Penance, a whole cliff face crowded with gods, sages, and animals, all turning toward a central cleft. Down that cleft, on festival days, real water once poured, so that the carved river of heaven seemed to fall through the rock. Among the crowd of figures, life-sized elephants march in procession, so finely cut they are still counted among the masterpieces of Indian art. There is even a joke in the stone, a cat standing on its hind legs in a holy man's pose, while the mice it is fooling gather around to worship. Nearby rests a giant boulder, perched impossibly on a bare slope, that visitors now call Krishna's butterball, and it was placed there not by sculptors, but by nature. Scattered across the site are the unfinished works, temples half-cut, reliefs barely begun. They are not failures. They are a window, showing exactly how the sculptors moved from a bare rock to a finished god. Then, around the year 700, the Pallavas turned from carving into the rock to building up from it. On the very edge of the beach, they raised the shore temple, one of the earliest stone temples of southern India, built block by block of granite. Its towers stand right at the waterline, facing east into the rising sun and the open sea, the first thing a ship would see coming home. because Mahabalipuram was never only a holy place. It was a working harbour, the gateway of the Pallava world to the ocean. From here, ships rode the monsoon winds out across the Bay of Bengal. They carried cloth and spices and ideas, and came back with gold and the goods of distant lands. And along those same sea lanes travelled something far more lasting than any cargo. For centuries, the kingdoms of Southeast Asia had been drawing in the religion, art, and learning of India. Hindu gods and Buddhist teachers, Sanskrit poetry, and Indian temple design, all of it flowed eastward across the water. And much of it flowed through ports like this one. But the Pallavas gave that world one gift above all the others, a way of writing. Their scribes used a script we now call Pallava, or Pallava Grantar, to carve Sanskrit and Tamil into stone. Carried east by priests, merchants, and monks, that script took root in foreign soil and began to change. And from it grew the alphabets of an entire region. The writing of the Khmers, of the Thai and the Lao, of the Javanese and Balinese, of the Burmese and the Khams, almost all of them trace their shapes back to this single South Indian script. Across thousands of kilometers of islands and coastlines, people still write today in the descendants of letters that once passed through the shore. This is what the old title really means, not a fleet that ruled the waves, but a current of culture pouring out across an ocean. A small kingdom on the edge of India helped teach half of Asia how to write. And the quiet engine of all that exchange was the port beneath the temples, where the granite met the sea. But the sea that carried the Pallavas' gifts to the world would, in time, turn against their city. As the centuries passed, the Pallava dynasty faded, and other kingdoms rose in the south. Mahabalipuram remained, its temples weathering in the salt wind, its harbour slowly losing its old importance. And the ocean kept coming in. Wave by wave, storm by storm, it gnawed at the shore. The shore temple, standing right at the water line, took the worst of it, its carvings worn smooth, its base battered by the surf, until in modern times engineers had to build a wall of rocks to hold the sea back. By the time European sailors began rounding this coast, the town had become a place of mystery. From the decks of their ships they could see temple towers standing on the shore, and, the local people told them, more had once stood there, now lost beneath the waves. The Europeans gave the place a name of their own. They called it the Seven Pagodas. They wrote of 7 great temples that had crowned this coast, of which the sea had swallowed 6, leaving only one above the water. Sailors traded tales of golden temple tops glimpsed shining beneath the surface, of a sunken city just offshore. It was a haunting story, and, like most legends, a mixture of fact, rumor, and romance. How many temples there had truly been, no one could say. The number 7 may owe as much to poetry as to memory. But the heart of the legend was not impossible. This was a coastline that had clearly changed, where the sea was advancing, and where work stone really did seem to lie out beyond the breakers. For 300 years, the 7 Pagodas stayed exactly that, a legend, unproven, repeated by travelers and waved away by scholars. And then, at the start of our own century, people went looking for the truth. Even before the great wave of 2004, divers had begun to search the water off Mahabalipuram. In 2002, a joint team of Indian and British researchers went down into the murky surf, guided by the fishermen who knew the bottom. And below the waves they found them, the foundations of walls, broken pillars, and scattered blocks of dressed stone, lying in rows on the seabed. Something man-made was down there, just offshore, beneath about 10 meters of water. Then came the tsunami. As the sea drew back that December morning, it briefly bared those structures to the open air, and as it surged in, it stripped away the sand that had hidden others on the beach for 1,000 years. When the archaeologists came to study the scoured shore, they uncovered the granite lion, the elephant, and the remains of small shrines, all in the unmistakable Pallava style. Out in the water, divers from the Archaeological Survey of India and the Navy mapped a long stone wall and the remnants of more structures, within sight of the shore temple. The shore temple itself had survived all these centuries, the archaeologists realized, because it stood on solid bedrock, while whatever had been built on the sand could not. So it was real, after all. The sea off Mahabalipuram does hold the ruins of a lost stretch of the old town. But it is worth being careful about what was actually found. There is no drowned city of 6 perfect temples waiting on the bottom. What lies there is more humble, the broken bones of structures the ocean reclaimed. The legend of the 7 Pagodas was not a fairy tale, and it was not the literal truth. It was a memory, worn smooth by time, of a shore the sea had genuinely taken back. The waves had buried the evidence. And then, one catastrophic morning, the waves gave a little of it back. Today, Mahabalipuram is a quiet town once more, its monuments protected as a World Heritage Site, visited by pilgrims and travelers from around the world. The shore temple still stands at the edge of the water, as it has for 13 centuries, facing the sunrise over the Bay of Bengal. Behind it, the 5 rock-cut chariots and the great carved cliff endure, the work of sculptors who treated mountains as if they were soft clay. This was the harbour of a dynasty that turned outward to the sea, and sent its gods, its art, and even its alphabet across an ocean to half of Asia. We remember it now half as history and half as legend, a city of temples with a drowned twin beneath the waves. But the stones that survive are wonder enough, and the sea, it seems, has not yet finished giving up their secrets. In the next video, we leave the southern coast and turn north, to a small and fierce kingdom that did something almost no one else in the 13th century managed. It faced the all-conquering armies of the Mongols, not once, but 3 times, and 3 times it won. That's the story of Dai Viet and the Mongol invasions. Subscribe so you don't miss it.